Welcome to Insights in Sound, where we talk to the people behind the scenes, behind the technology, and behind the music. People you may not know, but you should. And please check out getitInWriting.net/shows for a full list of our podcast YouTube series.
My guest is musician, educator, and author Jerry Kovarsky. Jerry, nice to see you.
Good to see you, my friend.
We have interesting background behind you, which I think is
doing weird things.
Yeah, it's actually kind of cool. I like it. So let's start out with a little bit of background on you for people who don't know all that you've accomplished. I know you started out as a musician, sadly, right?
Sadly, yes. And actually returned full circle. Okay, I'm of that generation. My parents woke me up to see the Beatles on S11. I was 7 years old, I think, or something.
Woke you up? Ooh.
Yeah, because I was young, and the show was on late for my bedtime, and it just changed my life. And I wanted to be a Beatle, not a musician, a Beatle. I didn't know any better. And I used to drum on coffee cans in my Beatle wig and all those things that we did.
You had a Beatle wig?
Oh, I had it all.
Oh, dude. All right.
And I tried taking guitar lessons. Where I lived, the store that we tried to do that at could only rent us a solid body electric guitar, and I just couldn't hold it in my lap and deal with it at all. So I crashed and burned. And then a couple of years later, one of my friend's mothers, who was a piano teacher, showed me by rote how to play Norwegian wood on their piano. And I was hooked. I became a piano student. I never wanted to learn classical or anything. I just wanted to play the pop music of the time. If I go through a quick litany, the first keyboard I ever owned was a Gibson G102 dual manual organ.
Wow.
Aficionados would know that as one of the organs that Ray Manzarek played in the Doors later after the Vox. And I never liked it. I had a lot of problems with it. Used to play Battle of the Bands with my little band, and if the place had dimmer switches, the thing would buzz and just get ground noise and hell, and I couldn't play with the band for the night.
They were delightfully cheesy.
It's actually a cool vintage instrument now, but it didn't work at all. Mm-hmm. And in a surprising move, I traded it in and stepped up to a Hammond B3.
Wow. So you got roadies in the deal early on, huh?
You know, God bless him, my dad bought a hunting trailer to move it around. It would drive me to rehearsals and gigs. God bless him. My parents supported me very much. So without going crazy into detail, yes, I wanted to. The only thing I knew from the time I saw the Beatles, I wanted to be a Beatle and then a musician. I went to college actually a year early. I was taking I'm jumping around. After seeing and hearing Emerson, Lake and Palmer, I was willing to accept classical music, which I never was before. And when I heard Keith on albums, and I brought it into my teacher, and he hit me up the side of the head, said, "It's what I've been trying to get you to do for years now." And I was going to the Manhattan School of Music prep division on weekends. And then because of good PSAT scores, I got an offer from the University of Miami to apply for their music department. And I jumped at it. I probably shouldn't have. I was a little too young. I didn't know anything about jazz. My audition tape consisted of me jamming on a Blind Faith tune.
Whoa.
Not jazz at all. But Jerry Coker, who was a famed educator, who was running the department, had just left. And they didn't know what they were doing. And they had one of the classical piano teachers listen to it. He goes, "Oh, jazz to me." So I got in.
Well, there's a fine line between jazz and wrong notes. So,
it was modal,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So 2 years at University of Miami, a year on the road with a show band, came back, finished my degree at William Patterson College in Wayne, New Jersey. now an amazingly renowned school for jazz. It was in the early days, but I got a degree, a BA in jazz studies, and I was an itinerant musician.
Musically speaking, you really kind of jumped right into, I mean, it's interesting that you went from Beatles to Ray Manzarek to boom, right into jazz and you know, classical progressive in that sense.
Yeah, I'm skipping lots of steps, but let's say I went from the top 40 to all of the classic rock to getting exposed to Frank Zappa, and
Ooh.
Frank Zappa became my bridge over to fusion and jazz. My first two jazz pianists that I could relate to, first was Oscar Peterson because of the blues in his playing,
Yes.
and then Bill Evans, who remains my primal wellspring, amongst many, many people. So yeah, it wasn't as surprising. It was a pretty
evolutionary,
steady progression. Yeah.
Okay. Now, at the same time, this is also an era when there was a lot of, shall we say, technological development going on, to put it lightly.
Mm-hmm.
What did that side of it look like for you? I mean, obviously, you went from an organ to a synthesizer at some point.
Well, okay, organ to Fender Rhodes, as would be a natural
Zarek.
progression.
Hey.
yeah, all that. And of course, from Frank Zappa, and where I first heard of George Duke, and the second side of the Grand Wazoo just blew my mind, and the stunning Rhodes playing and everything. But so from that stuff, going on the road with a band, had to get a string ensemble, and then synthesizers reared their head. My first synth that I personally played on gigs was an ARP Odyssey. I didn't know much about synthesis at all, so I didn't realize the potential of the instrument that I had back then. And then one of my buddies was on the road and found a used Mini Moog and said, "Hey, man, you want me to buy it and I'll bring it back to you?" I said yes, in a heartbeat. And so it became a Mini Moog. I could carry the B3 around to all the small, non-paying one-nighters we were doing. So when I sold the B3, I had enough money to buy a Prophet 5, serious amplification. I loaded in the clubs. My rig was an 18 to 12 and a JBL horn. Yikes. I had a half of a PA stack just for my keyboards. So yeah, it was this progression of these were the sounds on the records. So you had to get the gear to be able to do it.
So a lot of this was learning by doing.
Oh, absolutely. I never had any kind of electronic music courses in college or that kind of stuff. Funny story, the Hammond organ store in my town got an ARP 2600 back in the early days of synthesis, just in the corner. I think the ARP rep left it there and said, "See what can happen." I spent hours one day and couldn't get it out of drone mode. I didn't know which switch to get the keyboard to start playing pitches. So yeah, I didn't know what I was doing. Not at all.
Well, but clearly you started figuring it out. And that's one of the things that I find fascinating is people's approaches to synthesis, because there are some people who, of course, got exposed early on to modular synthesis, which lends you to a different approach than it sounds like what your approach was, which was more of just having the instrument sort of plunked down in your lap and figuring out, okay, how do I get this sound or that sound out of it?
Exactly. Modular would have given me a real early fundamental understanding of signal flow and the role of each thing. That stuff came much later through trial and error. But also throughout my career, I've always kind of known when I was near somebody that knew a lot of stuff to ask a question and shut up and listen. And that helped me immensely in the time. So I can fast forward that one now to, as an itinerant musician, did a couple of club dates with a guy that wasn't all that great of a musician or a leader. He called me one day and said, "I've got a recording session for you." He's written all the music for it. And I go in to do it, and it's for the third keyboard that Casio was going to introduce. They were very new in the market yet. It's a model called the CT301.
Ah, yes.
And it's a silly session that I own the copies of, and I will never release. And you can't find it. Search
that good, huh?
on the internet. And I met the head of the division at that time. He hired me to come out to a NAMM show just to play, not talk, not sell anything. And suddenly I had an entry to a NAMM show and seeing the industry for the first time. And
was
boy,
that
did I want to get a gig with any other company but the one I was working for.
interesting? Was it just that Casio wasn't cool, or was it that you were just enamored with everybody else's stuff?
Yes. So all of that.
All of the above. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I shared this story with Dave Smith's wife just the other week when we were talking about, my early relationship with Dave. I used to go to the sequential booth, and I was an owner of a Prophet 5, just trying to get discovered and get pulled out of my Casio land. Never happened. I met people there. So I did that for almost 4 years as a demonstrator for hire. They kept offering me gigs, and they were sales gigs and territories, and I didn't want to do it. I'm a musician, It wasn't until they showed me the CZ101. The head of the division calls me one day and said, "Can you come down? We're at this, hotel in Fairfield. I've got something I want you to see." So I go, and they've got a table set up in the hall, and there's the CZ101 with a couple powered speakers, and I check it out, and I go, "Man, this is like," I've been talking to the Casio engineers about the products and demoing everything that they made for those 5 years that I've known them now. And I said, "This is like nothing you've made before. Oh my God, I'm really digging this." He goes, "Good. Would you mind coming in the room and playing it a little bit? We got some of the salesmen in there." And I walk in, and it's a national sales meeting. "Jerry's going to show you the new product that you're going to be selling next month." Bam.
Jerry's going to figure it out right in front of you.
Yeah, but they did that to me many times. But the advent of the CZ101, then they finally made me a job offer that I related to, which was a product manager. Product management back then in a Casio wasn't like the traditional role at all. They weren't a good organized business, but it got me in the door, and now I was meeting people and learning and representing the product. My fusion band had broken up. Weddings were the only thing on the horizon. So it seemed like a much more interesting move to take. So I jumped at it.
There are also interesting cultural issues in dealing with any company that is based in another country. Japanese companies in particular, there is, at least in my experience, and you can tell me if this was similar for you, but I think there was a little bit of a disconnect between the engineers who were designing the products and the people who were actually working with the products. There wasn't a lot of feedback loop going on there. And so they would, at least in my case, a lot of times, all of a sudden, Tokyo would surprise us with this product. And it's, wow, you guys have been working on this and you didn't say anything? Personally, if I had been involved in something like that, I would be wanting to talk to people and get their input and everything. But it was definitely, there was a sort of almost a fiefdom of sorts culturally.
You're describing exactly the scenario we had. First of all, remember that it was such a consumer electronics company.
Yes.
Watches, calculators, music was something very new. During the heyday of the CZ series, and I got to be friends with some of the engineers, but in the early time, they explained nothing of the technology to me. I couldn't represent it to knowledgeable people because I never got deep training in it.
Yes.
I was flying by the seat of my pants again. I could demonstrate it well, but if you asked me really scientifically what was happening in the technology, I had only the cursory understanding. I demonstrated for them early. We had this keyboard called the CT201. Some staff from there was at the show, and I said to them, "You've got all the controls on the right-hand side, and that's my busier hand. It would be great if the controls were on the left, because that's the hand I'd more likely let go of to change a setting, whatever." And a year later, the CT202 came out and did what I asked for. My God, I was hooked. I had an impact. I did something. I lived with that kind of relationship for a number of years. We finally got to the point that they were developing an instrument called the VZ1 for you Europeans. And as the US distributor, we said, we're not going to buy it unless we can be involved in the voicing somewhat, because we were so out of the loop with everything. So they agreed, and I had hired a good buddy of mine at that point who was working with me, Ed Alstrom. And Ed and I got to go to Japan and get locked in little Wenger rooms for 8 hours a day to make sounds. Did they explain the technology? Not really. We did it by ear. So we finally at least got involved in something with them. But it was always, as you're saying, and I would still say for that company today, Japan develops a long-term view and roadmap. And the guys here in the US who are excellent and have so much to offer help a little bit, but not as much as they wish they could. Because when I first saw the CZ101, I gave them some ideas, and 7 models came out before any one of my ideas could be implemented in a product, which was the CZ1. That's how far ahead the schedule was planned.
It's true. It's almost, and I don't think it's intentional in that sense, but I think it's just, as you say, there is an engineering group that are so hard focused on the roadmap that they've laid out that they don't even think about the idea of getting feedback from others outside their group.
Sure. This will jump us way out of the chronology, but when I went to Korg, the biggest impact that I had with them was related to kind of human engineering and process. They were developing incredible technologies. I wasn't coming up with the fundamental science for a new form of synthesis, but there were so many times, there were so many instances where it's like, well, I want to do this. And they go, well, you can do it. And they would show me, and it was a 12-step process of menu diving and yada, yada. And I'd say, but this is a common thing. We should make it a button. We should make it a command. And the whole thing should become a macro, because I'm impatient. And it was hard for them in the beginning to understand that, because in the Japanese culture, they're very accepting of, if it's 5 to 10 tedious steps, fine, that's the rules. We'll do the rules, and it does get the job done. Western world, we're impatient, we're impetuous, we need it today.
That also brings up a really interesting point, which is that in the development of this technology, eventually there did come, at least in my experience as a product manager, there did come a point where people heard you and they listened to you because they realized that there is value in the input of people who are actually using these tools on a day-to-day basis. And that, I think, is what we brought to the table.
And as a product manager, you were working with so many artists and experts that you could come back, you know, and nowadays they would call it, give me a use case. Well, you were meeting with people and getting all that information all the time. And when you could make it real, when you weren't a salesman complaining about a spec that the other guy had or just wanted a bigger number, when you could give a logical, tangible reason and case for it, much easier to break through that barrier.
You know, you had mentioned something earlier that I thought was important, which was the whole idea of how it borders adjacent to sales, because a lot of musicians don't want to get involved in that side of the industry, in product management, working with manufacturers, because they feel that is the antithesis of being an artist.
Exactly.
And to me, there's a delineation between the sales and the product management side. And the funny story about that, actually, a friend of mine who also for many years was a product management person, he said, you know, I was once, I was at a trade show booth with another guy, and somebody came up and asked, you know, what's the price on this, whatever it is? And he said, I don't know, you know, and
not my job.
Right. He said, you know, and then later on, this guy said, yeah, it's $3.99. And I said, what is, you know, I said, oh, well, why didn't you say that then? Because as soon as I mention price, that puts me into the sales category. And it's a good observation, because I think to an extent, we are talking about these instruments as tools, as artistic tools. And as soon as you start talking money and sales, it brings you off into a completely different direction in terms of how people perceive you.
Hmm. Absolutely. A big part of my success across all the companies that I was at is when it came time to sit down with an artist and talk about the instrument or talk about music and art and life. They quickly saw that, well, I am a musician. I understand.
Yes.
I get it. And
Yes.
so I stopped being a suit. I stopped being a
Yes.
marketing and sales guy. And let's face it, if you work for a company developing product, managing anything, it's always sales in the end. You can't divorce yourself from that. But when you come across as truly understanding the gear, truly understanding the customer's wants and needs, understanding music and the process, you're in a whole different position. And that's absolutely where my success thrived from, because I came from that. I was that.
And I would add to that understanding the gig. That's one of the things when I did artist relations for sure. When I would walk into a venue where an artist was playing, the first perception would always be, oh, you're the Shore guy. And then we would have a conversation. You get to the point where they realize, okay, I'm one of you. I've been on tour. I understand all of the pain points that you're going through.
Yeah, yeah.
And that to me completely changes the relationship. Then
Although
you
it doesn't
here.
stop everybody from asking you for free gear.
Oh, no, never. That always happens, of course.
If you're the Sure guy, you're the candy man.
It happens to this day. With any company that I know, hey, anybody at so and so, which it happens to us all, and that's part of being, part of the music industry community. But I think there's a realization that we are brethren and sistren. I don't know. What do you?
Yes.
But we are all together. We relate to each other on that level, and I think that really changes the tenor of the conversation.
Invariably, when you learn the background of all of our friends and peers who we met in the business from their role at these different companies, you go back and they were in a band.
Yep.
And they were recording and other stuff. And invariably, when they retire or just decide to step away, they go back to playing music because it never left being part of what defines us all.
Absolutely. And I think that is really part of the beauty of working in this industry, being a part of this industry, is that we're all enamored with these tools, not because they're geeky tools, but because we use them to create something beautiful.
Sure. I've always described, and I told you this one earlier, I've always described my job as making the toys that I wanted to play with.
It's so true. So let's fill in the blanks on the timeline there. After you left Casio, I know
Sure. Okay. So
you were over at Ensoniq for a while as well.
Absolutely. We got to the point at Casio, we made a whole slew of professional products, and I became the figurehead for the professional products division, moving from just being a product manager, which was not a traditional role at all. But as we started to make more products, I created a pro products division. I tried to work to clean up the channel and do it respectably. Little did I know, I actually got to the point that I was working on a plan to change the name of the brand for the pro products because Casio carried so much baggage.
Sure.
Like an idiot, not realizing it's the family name. And if I had ever presented my plan to the company, I probably would have been thrown out the door, because how could I make a statement that the family name stood for corny, accompaniment keyboards or whatever it was.
Digital.
But we got,
yes.
Yeah, it was misguided. But we got to the point that in the product plan, I saw that there were no more pro products coming. We had done the VZ1, which didn't succeed at all, thanks to the 1-2 punch of the D50 coming out and then the M1, and we were gone.
Ow.
And we had the FZ1. We made, a couple offshoots. After I left, they had made a VZ8M and an FZ20, but I knew it was all gone. And I had been trying to get the advertising company to consult with a fellow you probably know, Jeff Hasselberger.
Sure.
who was doing the advertising for Ensoniq. I loved their ads. I loved the voice, the tone, our Casio ads, even when I got very involved, and we're still corny, etc. And that didn't happen. But then suddenly Jeff reaches out and calls me and says, "Hey, the VP of marketing is leaving. We need to fill the spot. Would you be interested?" And this came just as I knew there was no pro future at Casio. So short story, I went down, interviewed, took the job. And I started there in December of 1988, the director of marketing, who had no traditional marketing background.
Yeah.
I never managed a budget, you know,
I know that feeling. That's called jumping in at the deep end.
Exactly.
Story of my life. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And you learn from it.
Absolutely.
But so now suddenly I was at a company that everything started and happened there. It was developed there. You could talk to the people in English. The factory was there. We made everything and reached out to the world. An incredible experience for me. Obviously, an incredible learning experience. Now I went from working for a consumer electronics distributor to a manufacturer, a very, very smart company with great engineering, great products.
Who were at their peak at that point, too.
Say what?
Who were at their peak at that point.
Oh, yeah. We we had ups and downs. The company almost closed doors 3 times in my 8 years with them. So we had highs and we had incredible risks. Within 4 months of my joining them, we almost got shut down. The VFX keyboard that we were developing had big chip problems, and the bank was going to renege on their note. So we had to ship them knowing they were going to fail.
Yikes.
Keep the doors open, and then we'd fix them and we'd make life right, which we did. It was a very rough juncture. But I had a young baby daughter, had moved to an area I knew nobody. And I'm like, why didn't I do more due diligence? How did I realize this company was at the brink? But we survived. Great, great team. I loved it. I did everything you can imagine, from all the marketing collateral you can imagine. I used to lay out the back of spec sheets myself, shipping boxes. We managed the manuals, but we also managed voicing. All the sound development was managed by marketing. So I loved that part of the role. I had a guy working for me who was just excellent, achieved incredible things for us there. So I'll just say that eight of the biggest learning and happiest years of my life, really, now I'm finally doing everything I want to do with synths and keyboards and MI. And then things were getting a little weird at the company, and Korg kept calling. Mike Kovens, who was the president of Korg USA, and he kept trying to steal me away for years. We'd get on the phone, I'd lie about our business, he'd lie about his business, and we bonded amazingly.
sounds like a brotherhood made in heaven. Absolutely.
Such a great guy. Mm-hmm. And suffice it to say, when things got really weak and weird at Ensoniq, I jumped over to Korg. Now I'm back a second time with a Japanese company, but I have all this experience working for a manufacturer, understanding the engineering process, everything that it takes. So I was able to so quickly ingratiate myself into the Japanese engineering group, because there are a couple of great things I learned from the head of engineering at Ensoniq. One of the ones was, it's not the only one we'll ever make. Let go of this group of features. We've got to get this out. Don't worry. We'll make another. Your ideas aren't lost. And this is not just to me. It's to everybody. It's like, okay, it's okay to freeze the spec. We'll do more.
Ideas are cheap. You'll always come up with another one. If this is your last great idea, you're in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, but we got to get something out the door. We got to keep revenue going. So I was immediately so effective over there. Now, they used to be, Mike wanted to hire me to help coordinate between the various groups that did development at Korg. You have the parent company in Japan doing the bulk of it, but they had the Korg R&D group up in Northern California, which was originally part of Dave Smith's group. Right. Sequential went under. Yamaha bought them. They did some work for Yamaha. Yamaha didn't know what to do with them. they sold them to Korg. So this is the group that did the wave station. You know, a number of things. Eventually, this is the group that developed the Oasis and the majority of the technology in the Kronos. And then there's an Italian group that did all the arranger products and then did the SV1 stage piano, SV2. And Mike saw the need that they weren't talking to each other. They were each developing their own technologies in their own silos. And he had always brought me into the company to make sure that the company was making the products that we could sell in the US. Look out for our market. So I got to know everybody, but they trusted me because they saw that I wasn't a sales and marketing guy chasing spec and always just asking for a lower price and all that stuff.
Well, and
So
the company culture was a lot different at Korg than what you had been accustomed to at Casio, I'm sure.
so less formal, run by a very charismatic leader, Kato, who was a nightclub owner.
Mm-hmm.
More than familiar with the Yakuza and the gangster world, etc. The U.S. operation, Mike was an incredibly passionate with the artists, with education, really looking out for things. So this became just everything I could have ever wanted to do. I'll give you just a quick example. Every time I went to Japan, I could walk in the building without an escort. You know, I didn't have a badge, but everybody knew me. I could walk around freely. Every time I went there, I took a meeting with every group that was developing technology products other than guitar, and they would present what they were working at and ask me my opinion and ask me for input. I came there in June of '96. So the N364 came out. I obviously had nothing to do with that. The Z1 and the SG Pro X, and then every product up through the Kronos, a multitude of things. I'd meet with them. I'd give them ideas. I'd react. It was the pressure of meetings every 2 hours, and I walk in and go, I got to be smart again. I've got to, somehow I got to come up with insider reaction or understand what they're doing. But oh, what a joy.
And I think having a situation like that, in certain ways, it makes you smarter, because it tickles those brain cells that really that you want to tickle, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And as you get to know your peers and you all talk, and again, like I said, around somebody smart, ask a question and shut up. I learned so much. It wasn't that I was so good, but I was a good sponge.
Absolutely. And that's part of it to me. Is I love the idea of surrounding myself in a room full of people whose pocket protectors are way bigger than mine, you know, because you learn so much just from letting them just talk amongst yourselves, you know.
Yeah.
And listen. So let's transition a little bit to at a certain point, you, whether formally or informally, began taking on a role as educator. You were writing columns, you were writing books. How did that all start happening?
Okay, well, towards the end of my time with Korg, when Marshall pulled away from Korg USA to form their own distribution, and we had what traditionally known as a spreadsheet layoff from the top down.
Ouch.
You can either increase sales or cut costs. So they cut costs. So my position was whatever I'm trying to remember the term that they used.
Made redundant.
Yeah. My position was made redundant, etc. I stayed on as a consultant to finish the Kronos with the team, but I was out of that. And I looked around the industry for a while, and I had done 30 plus years now, suddenly, with keyboard companies. And I met with some companies. Yeah, suddenly it was a long haul. How did that happen? There was just nothing on the horizon that I just felt like standing up in front of again. I wasn't ready. And I wasn't one of those people that just, I'll take whatever job because I got to make the money. I just said, I don't think I want to do this. So I'll figure out something else. And it makes no sense at all. But I said, okay, what's the something else? Let me go back to being a musician. There's a game plan. But as you well know, it was expensive for me to live on Long Island where I was living, and my wife and I followed our dreams and said, well, where would we want to be in the world? And we've always loved Hawaii. So we'd been going to Maui for, 30 years, on timeshare there, and just decided, could we make that work? Certainly it's a place that I could go back to being a musician with so much tourism, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So we did it. We transitioned. We moved to Maui, and right after I got let go of Korg, Stephen Fortner, who was the editor of Keyboard Magazine, said, man, we've got to start doing things together. We've known each other for a long time now. I handled all the reviews with them. So he said, what do you want to do? And I jotted down a couple of ideas, and we came up with, I'll do a column on the art of synth soloing. And I did 121 columns in that series for multiple editors. After keyboard went away, it went into EM. After all the magazines got bought by Future Music Publishing, I'm one of the only things that stayed alive. In fact, I still write for them today. I don't do the art of synth soloing. I do some other stuff. So it started out by, I started teaching there. You always, as a product person, you had product specialists, you trained on technology, etc. But now I was writing a column that was teaching everything about synth soloing, how to make the sounds, how to play them, how to make them more expressive, migrating into the famous players and their styles and their solos. Then again, Stephen Fortner came to my rescue, and I'm in Maui and not working much yet. He got contacted by the Wiley Publishing Company, who are the people behind all that series of dummy books. And they had piano for dummies, but they wanted to do electronic keyboards for dummies. And Stephen said, there's no way. It's all I can do to be putting the magazine out. I know a guy. Uh-huh. And he handed the opportunity to me on a platter. Just when I needed it. So for 8 months, I holed up and I learned how to write a book. And the dummies books, they have their act together. The tone, the language, how you write. The editors were really strict on me, but it was a great experience. And I wrote Keyboard for Dummies. It's everything but the learning how to play that Piano for Dummies already covered. So I got to go a lot of cool places. How to transcribe music, how to use arranger keyboards. What are the difference between, electric piano and an organ and a synthesizer and a string ensemble, etc. So now I had two things that I was doing. My monthly column on synth soloing, and I did the book.
So essentially you found yourself all of a sudden being an educator,
mm-hmm.
which really wasn't that different from what you had been doing in a sense, even though you didn't know it.
Exactly. And, as a product manager and working at a company, you're working so closely with marketing. At Ensoniq, I used to write the copy, and, we developed our own ads and hired a photographer. But Korg used to put out a ProView magazine, and articles needed to be written, and on and on. So you slowly developed your way and your style to doing it. And now suddenly, along with my gigging, I had another leg of the stool, which became that writing and teaching. Uh-huh. Which I love to do.
I think, that it's interesting that something very similar happened to me, because I felt that not only by demonstrating a product, but by talking to people about it, by creating the marketing materials behind it, you're learning how to tell a story.
Yeah.
And you're learning how to tell that story then informs your understanding of how to be an educator. Because mm-hmm. you're learning how to pass along wisdom and pass along knowledge in a way that hopefully is not just dry. You're sure. actually learning how to convey it from a human to human perspective. And I think those are the best educators.
Did you ever teach
yes.
private lessons, anything?
I taught private lessons, and I also taught college. So
I never really liked the idea of doing group or classroom study. But once I was in college, I was giving piano lessons. And when I left school, I had on average 30 students a week, along with my gigs and sessions and, whatever I could do.
Mostly one-on-one stuff?
Oh, yeah, always one-on-one. So that other thing that you learn when you teach is you need to know how to come at the subject more than one way. If they're
Yes.
not understanding it, you need to find another way to convey the same information.
Yes.
And we use that skill when we talked to manufacturers whose primary language wasn't English.
That's true. And in fact,
You had to find
yeah.
what approach would work. The Japanese used to ask me all the time at Korg, do you understand what we're talking about? Because I would say something, I'd give them time, I'd watch them discuss, I'd watch the body language. Technology words never get translated, so you knew they were talking about sequencer or whatever it was.
Yes.
And then I'd offer something, and they'd go, "You understood?" I guess
I went
what?
through the same thing with when I lived in Germany and worked with artists. I was artist relations for the whole continent, so I would travel to a lot of different countries. And other than German, I didn't understand any of the languages.
Mm.
With a lot of the regions, you don't even understand the German because the dialect is so different, you know. But there is, as you say, there's a common thread there. And one of the things that I think really helped me also was being able to address these things with a large group of people. That helped me when I started teaching college, because I understood from trade show presentations that it's not just about communicating the information, but it's a performance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It really is. It's a, you know, when I would come into my class every day, I would have to make sure that I was mentally prepared to basically hold court, almost like a stand-up comedian in that sense.
Yeah.
There's a real art form to that, I think.
Absolutely. That's why I always like the one-on-one, because I knew whether they were getting it or not. I could watch them. But in the meetings with the large group of engineers, you could kind of tell one guy wasn't getting it, or he was arguing. And if either of those cases came up, you had to say, well, what's another way that I can present this? How can I come around another corner? The more years, the more times you do it. At Korg, I would go to Japan 5 to 8 times a year.
Wow.
I was there a lot. Like I said, I was meeting with all the teams, checking up on the progress, being part of the voicing groups for every product they did, and more as a producer. They had guys way more talented than I am making the actual sounds. But the more times you're put in that situation, you've got that accumulated knowledge. So you get more and more effective. That's why I got to that point that I was, somebody that they wanted my opinion on what they were doing, because I had helped them in previous ones. I mean, there's a couple examples. These are the things that you don't tend to talk about so much. But when you say, okay, what did you do on a given product? Because I didn't invent any one of the products. I was not solely responsible for any product. It was a team. There were so many people.
Yeah.
But like, how did you have an impact? When I looked at the Korg product line, and again, the Trinity was the top product at the time. That N364 had just come out. I'm coming from Ensoniq, which were very Western developed, intuitive products. And now I've got these amazing technology, but much more inscrutable. So I made a bunch of notes about problems that I had with the Korg workstation. And I laid out a bunch of ideas, things that I wanted them to do. This became the part of the project when we developed the Triton. Individual looping tracks in the sequencer. The voicing guys used to do a timbral trick that if they shifted an oscillator up an octave and then use the fine tuning, well, I shouldn't use an octave, a whole step up, and then use the fine tuning to bring it back down a whole step, they've shifted the multi-sample map. They moved it up to another sample and then pitched it down. And, you stretch a sample, the timbre changes.
Sure.
Well, I learned from the voicing guys they were doing this all the time. So I said, make it a parameter. We put it on the home screen as a slider that they didn't have to figure out the math. It just did those offsets automatically. So things like that happened. Jumping way ahead, when we were developing the Electribe Groovebox products, they were putting a slider on it because the Akai MPC had a slider. And in the Akai MPC, the slider was just chromatic.
Right. And
I sat and I looked at it with them. I go, but that's actually useless when I'm making music. Who's going to be going up and down through a chromatic scale? I said, we should put it into musical scales, modes, and the blues scale, and do that. Became a whole part of the project. I could go on and on with these ones, but they were like, you sit there and you go, your stuff is great. You've done brilliant technology. Now let me come at it from the musician and the user, and I'll give you these kind of ideas.
Well,
And
and
what a joy.
you put it really well by saying you were a producer, because I think that essentially is the role you were adopting. It's kind of like joining the artist and seeing, okay, here are your songs. What can I do to help you bring those creations to the next level?
Sure.
And it's
every product that we did, I always worked with them that I said, I'm going to find 2 or 3 new guys to do voicing along with the core team. We need somebody younger that knows, this electronica genre. We just need another. If one guy's making all the organ sounds and another guy always makes all the brass and woodwinds, we're getting a singular perspective on those. So every time it was like, let me just bring in one guy to shuffle the deck, 2 guys to shuffle the deck. 100% a producer's role.
I love it. So let's bring it full circle. Let's say you're coming into the industry now, completely different world. What kind of advice would you give somebody coming into the industry these days?
Okay, let me organize. Well, I'll start a little bit from the product side. I came in a young and innocent era that I was able to achieve so much, not having the grounding and the skills coming in the door. You're not going to get into a role like a product manager, etc., now without having the really studied background. You need to know the business school and the engineering school side of what is product management, what are product management processes, what are some of maybe the history of those, research and statistics to do surveys. You need a much better grounding. You have to remember that we're dealing with musical instruments, but we're not just sitting in a room playing with them. You're still doing a very thoughtful, process-driven job. It happens to be a musical instrument, and you need that background and that understanding, but you also need the traditional, the modern skill sets. Just because you like music or you can play bass doesn't completely make you qualified to manage a bass brand or a bass line of products. You can consult to react to them, to be a data point for research. Sometimes that's a great way to start. Another great way to start that a lot of us in the industry did was by being a product demonstrator. So many of the people started by being a musician, being hired to kind of play and show them. And then if you can speak well, if you don't do a lot of if you can put out coherent thoughts, etc., you can progress in that. But beyond the demonstrator, which has to have all the communication that you've talked about and telling a good story, but if you want to move beyond that, you need the background. So you better be going to school for it, reading books, watching YouTube University. There's so many places to get the information. My point is that you have to realize that you need the information.
But where do you see the industry going now in terms of, because as you say, the technology has changed, the tenor of the industry has changed. Is it still, do you think it's still the same way in now? Or is it different? How much is it different?
That's an interesting one. No doubt it's different because none of it is as casual as it was back in the early days. But
yeah,
I don't know that I'm answering your question, but I see how many schools and courses there are learning recording engineering. Promises of a course that'll make it easy to master in 3 steps and all this,
come on. I want it
snake
instant.
oil, right? But the fact of the matter is at this point, there's very little industry for you to then go use those skills at. Very few studios. Even at the time when ADAT became big, which was one of those big tipping points when suddenly they said, oh, guys can make albums at home. Guys can just deliver me a finished master that will market and sell.
Yes, indeed.
So you can go to all these schools and learn this stuff, but then where are you going to apply yourself? Where are you going to get that? There's very little mentorship, from your career and being around it. There's so few studios that you can go to and empty the garbage and go get lunch for people, sweep the floors, and slowly learn your way. But I speak to a lot of higher end engineers that are still working in studios that say kids are coming in thinking that they should be able to do more because they went to that school, they got that background. So now, come on, let me second engineer, let me run the session. Now, you still got to pay your dues.
Well, you still have to learn the people skills too, and I think that's
huge.
One of the biggest things right there is learning when to keep your mouth shut, learning when to observe, learning how the creative process works. Because if you just walk in there, I mean, that's a very fragile process, and you can just blow a hole in something really quickly if you don't take the time to learn those things.
There's so much stuff that the talent, people would go, who's this person? Why are they even speaking up? It's,
yeah.
We're doing this now. So I'm talking a lot. I'm talking about myself. You're doing a good job of listening. We end up having a dialogue, but most situations you do much better to speak a lot less, to ask some questions. If you want to ingratiate yourself with somebody, ask them about themselves and let them tell their story. We all have egos, but you have to understand most of the time it's not your place to be telling your story. I hate interviewers that interrupt to tell their similar story when they're interviewing somebody who's got a much more interesting story. Shut up. Let them talk a little bit more. You're just trying to prod them to bring out the story. That's a huge skill you need in these situations.
It's really true. And I think that's one of the things that it takes a long time to learn. And even in terms of working, not just in terms of working with artists, but I think in general, the human dynamic, it's so hard to learn that. And I think you're right. I think giving people the opportunity to talk about themselves, if you do it right, you can get them to open up, and you can get them to, I mean, that's the gift that salespeople have, really gifted salespeople, make it about. I
learned that from a very good salesman who I watched him do that all the time. He would ask a question, be very interested in it, follow it up with a couple more questions, never injecting his personal story into it, just agreeing and wanting to hear more from the other person. And the person goes, man, you're a great guy. I love talking to you. Of course.
Well, absolutely.
But what else can I think about in your stuff? There is no doubt that you need to know your customer. You need to know the intended audience for your product in incredibly intimate and varied detail. Okay, now you kind of say that I'm a fusion jazz funky music guy. I grew up through classical rock, but when I play classical rock, the rock guys go, you still sound like a jazzer, no matter what you do. It's and I'm certainly not a roots blues guy, although I can play in that field, but I'm not authentic. You need to not let your own biases guide you too much. You need to know a lot more. I always went out and found other people in the companies and people that I could use as resources to help teach me, because you have to know that you don't know everything. You have to know what you don't know. So you need that inquisitive, open mind and that sense of going, there's much more to learn than what I know. Never lose that.
I think that's the best advice you could give anybody right there. Stay hungry for knowledge.
Yeah.
Really true.
And knowledge that seems further away from your interests or your wheelhouse. You're going to be a better person for being aware of those other things. You can't live in that little silo.
No, I mean, that's why I think we call some people Renaissance people, because the breadth of their knowledge is so wide. And, I always love the idea of being able to just come up with useless trivia for the same reason.
And you are a master of that.
Especially the useless part, yes.
That and dad jokes. You're
Oh, I got those nailed, let me tell you. But no, I think you're really right. I think staying open and staying hungry for wisdom and knowledge is, and especially if you're teaching, I think there's nothing better as a teacher than being open to learning, because that's the best perk of teaching, is learning.
You talk about the educational side of things. So for the last almost 2 years now, I write for Yamaha for their blog site under the editorial direction of a good friend of mine. And I write a piece on every month. I write something on keyboard musicianship. And in the beginning, I directed, what I wanted to write about, and I ran about roadmap. Now in time, I of course got a little too deep and sophisticated too quickly. So they kind of asked me, well, we want beginners to be able to, and retirees who are coming back to music. So they're feeding me subjects to write about. But I do so much research, even though I know the subject. I don't trust that I know the subject in a wide and varied enough way. And then they give me other job assignments, whether it's interviewing people. I've done some wonderful interviews, Dr. John Chowning on the development of FM, a fellow who modifies Yamaha pianos cosmetically and made a purple piano for Prince. He made Elton John's red piano. Then they gave me a 2-part series to do on the history of synthesis, 1,000 words each column, which seems like a ridiculous assignment, but you go out and study so much. So I'm doing 2 things. I'm sharing my accumulated knowledge, but I'm learning. Every month that I write something, I go out and I don't just assume I know it, I can put it to paper. I go out and I research it like crazy to do all these extra ones that I have to do. Or a synth company wanted somebody to write about musicianship because they knew that their users were basically holding down a key and patching and twiddling knobs. And it's like, well, maybe here's a way that you could play a chord on a pad sound that's a little bigger, a little wider. So we did kind of, remedial musicianship aimed at synth fans. So the research and the learning from that. But I'm at the point, and I know you're at this kind of point, that you also feel like, well, I want to do something with my accumulated experience. I want to give it back.
Absolutely. It's one of the reasons I do this show.
I love how many people I've, number one, heard the name of, but never really knew their story that I'm getting from yours. And then you and I joke about this a lot. We've been in the industry so long, we know so many of the same people, yet we never knew each other because we traveled in different lanes.
Yes.
You in pro audio and me very much in MI.
Yes.
So in this show, I'm getting to know all these people that were in that other lane that I might have heard the name, but it's fascinating. I applaud you for doing it.
And for me, I get to interview these people that, as you say, they were traveling in a parallel lane to me, and there were things I just didn't know, or strange encounters that we had years ago. I've discovered a couple of times in a couple of different interviews that someone I was talking to actually did a session in the same studios that I worked in at the same time, and we have these common memories. And I think that is one of the really beautiful things about this, is that I don't get to just share information with other people. I get to learn things myself every time.
And you had a common experience, but they saw it from a different angle and brought you new insights into something that you thought you completely understood, until they go, well, no, something else was happening at the same time. If you were in my position, you might have seen, and
absolutely,
you get clarification.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well,
and you and I share our ability to give back by our work on the Bob Moog Foundation.
Absolutely. It's another thing I really value, is the idea of being able to further education, not only for, young adults, but even for young children who are just learning the world around them, and to be able to teach them the science of music in a sense.
Sure. Without the rules of a musical instrument lesson and the piano teacher hitting their wrist or whatever, they're learning that sound is fun.
Yeah, exactly. I love seeing their eyes light up when you teach them something about, even if it's just something like how the brain localizes where a sound is coming from. Why does a piano playing this note sound different from a flute playing the same note? All of those little concepts, you're talking to 8-year-old kids who are just figuring out the world around them. And that knowledge is just, to me, that's part of what really it generates. Learning the arts, I think, in general, really helps to generate critical thinking, nonlinear thinking.
Mm-hmm.
That is so impactful later in life.
And not enough people actually realize that, and that's why we're doing what we're doing, because the arts is one of the more endangered areas in education, because they don't think they can measure the benefit like they can with traditional math and science. And then everybody loves sports, so the arts become the lowest man on the totem pole.
Yes, and unfortunately it leads to a public that is not as capable of critical reasoning where it counts. And to me, that's something that I really feel strongly about, that I want to do my part in changing. And I think we're both doing our parts in that. And I applaud you as a brother in arms on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Jerry Kovarsky, thank you for being my guest. This has been way better and way more exciting than I even expected it to be. And we've had dozens of conversations over the years, but
yeah.
Yes,
I
a lot here.
It's interesting because the more that you're on a day-to-day basis not talking with people about this, I'm here watching a baby granddaughter and yada yada. It's nice to have these conversations about subjects that are at the core of our passion.
It's so true. It's so true. Well, thank you for this, and thank you for being my guest.
Oh, no problem. I'm happy to do it. Hope it came out well.
Hey, I'm Daniel Keller. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join us each week for Insights in Sound.